Hey, welcome to my first video. Jason from Who Ya Woodworks. So, I've been on just over a year journey now. And I started out with a desktop CNC machine. Bought it on Amazon, less than $1,000. Followed the instructions when I took it out of the box, put it all together. I was fairly confident the machine wasn't going to blow up when I did my first carve. Beyond that, there was a zero confidence level. I was interested in what it could do, that's why I bought it. I watched videos on what it can do. That was neat. But being comfortable that I could strap down a piece of wood, put in a super sharp bit, fire up a spindle to 18,000 RPM, hit a few keystrokes on a computer, and hit go, and nothing bad happened, I wasn't there. So I spent a lot of time online, YouTube, like you are right now, and on the internet and forums and things of that nature. I never found that thing that made me comfortable to start my first carve. I was looking for it, and honestly, I'm glad I didn't find it. I'm hoping that you don't have to learn the hard way that I did. There's some frustrating mistakes that I made. There's time consuming for sure. There's costly, broken bits, ruined pieces of wood, and then I'll have an example later where I made a dangerous mistake. I want to take that slightly over a year window and shorten that dramatically for whoever wants to take the time to watch some of these videos. I want them to be confident. They just took it out of a box, they're ready to hit go, they've watched enough of my videos, they're comfortable, and they're ready. There's so much that can be done with these machines, and it's amazing. When it's done and it's done right, I'm proud to hand some of these things off to friends and family, or sell them even. I went from, it was going to be a little hobby and it was neat, all the way to the point where I'm running a full-fledged website now. I've shipped a few things internationally. I'm selling things for a profit. Going into year two, knock on wood, this year's going to be profitable for me. First year, I spent a lot of time and money trying to learn. And if I could reduce that time and reduce that money, that's what this is all about. I wanted to share my journey with you, and hopefully you get something out of it. If anything, reduce some of the fear that you might have. And then tap into your creative side. There's things that I can take from I'm at lunch thinking about something, it pops in my head. I can now come home and within 30 minutes to an hour, have it ready to go. And I just got to find the right piece of pretty wood to put on the machine and start. So let's turn you around. We'll talk about the machine I have right now. And then we'll talk about the machine I came from, the differences between them, the benefits to some, the pros and cons that go with it. I'll give you some kind of costs that go with it, but let's get into it. So what we'll do in this first video is go over some of the jargon, the key terms that in order for you to watch a YouTube video like this one, or from some of the other creators, or to jump online and go into some of the forums, there's terms that are used that you wouldn't use in your everyday job if you work in an office or a cubicle. So in order to get to that comfort level, I want you to be able to talk the talk, understand the talk, and be able to replicate something. If there's an instructional video that says move your X and Y axis over to here, what exactly does that mean? If it says adjust your Z axis by 1/1000th of an inch, what exactly does that mean? So let's get into that and then go over some of the terms. So here's the machine I currently have. It's a Shapeoko 5 Pro. What makes it a Pro is that it uses, they call them lead screws, inside each of the axes instead of using belts. Belts work, they're inexpensive, they help keep down the cost of the machine, but belts stretch and belts slip from time to time. I did have an intermediate machine in between my first one and this one, and it was 100% belt driven, and I started getting some slippage on some high-speed cuts. And when you're working on a very finely detailed carve, or you're working on a three-dimensional, or you're trying to repeat the same cut over and over and over again, being off by a millimeter matters. You're gonna notice. And God forbid it slip halfway through a carve, because then everything's gonna shift inside that. So I'll initialize the machine. So what it's doing now is it's gonna find home. For Shapeoko and Carbide Create, they call it initializing. But what it does is it goes all the way to the back, all the way to the right, and then comes all the way up to the front right corner. That is what we call home. If I was to say the bottom left corner of my board is right there, it knows exactly the distance from home to start. Then I can move the spindle around anywhere on here and say go home. Boom. It now knows exactly where the temporary home is that I told it. You'll see that this is going to come all the way up to the front. It'll stop and it'll know exactly where it is. Boom. Now, anywhere on this 4x4 area, I can say, this is what I want you to call home now. All it's doing is saying this spot that they told me to call home is this far this way and this far this way from my current point. At that point, moving forward, it will call that home until you tell it to stop. So some of the key parts. Right here, it's a Makita hand router. Sometimes you hear it called spindle. There is a such thing as a spindle and there is a such thing as a router, but the terminology used for the thing that is going to spin the bit and cut into the wood, typically they call it a spindle. So it moves up and down. It's the only movement it has. Then this whole entire assembly that it's moving up and down on, and that's called the X, or the Z, sorry. It's called the Z. The height is the Z. X is how far across. Y is how far back. So when you're setting an X and a Y, you're telling it where on this board am I? And then when you set the Z, you're saying how high off of the board am I? And that matters. Here's an example of what I mean. So if I was to say start carving at the top of this board right here, that top is in a very different location than the top of that board. If I had the settings set for this one, set down here, and if I said this is the top, but my board was really this tall, as my bit started to come down to try and reach this height, it would gouge, potentially break, as it's trying to get to the front left corner that I tell it is it's XY. Z is the important part. How high am I starting? And what you want is the highest part on your board. Most boards you're going to put down are going to be flat before you start. So you're going to say, here's my XY bottom left corner, and here's my height. Here's my Z. At that point, as this works its way over, it's going to know exactly where the top surface is, and it'll start carving on its toolpath. Again, if I was to try and go this high on here, I'm going to break something. And trust me, I have. So, recap. Z, X, Y. Very important. So for me, what I did is I took a square and I put it down. That is almost always my XY point. Z varies on every single piece of wood. Even if I was to take another piece of wood, to you, they look about the same. But you'll notice that one is thicker. It's important that it knows exactly where the top of that one is. Now, if I switch to this one, imagine it trying to carve on a surface that there is no wood yet. It hasn't made it far enough down to even touch the wood. So the only thing that changes when you put a new piece of wood here is every single board you say, here's my Z, here's my Z, here's my Z. They're all three of these are different Z's, even though I could put them in the exact same XY. So I think with that brief 10-minute video, we've got you to the point now where you understand enough terminology that in the next video, we'll set our XY, we'll set our Z, we'll hook up the dust boot to the dust collection, and we'll actually do our first carve. We'll go into additional details on how do I hold the piece of wood down. There's a lot of different ways. Which ones will work for you? We'll go over it. What kind of dust collection should I put on my shop vac? We'll go over some options. But right now, you know enough to be confident when we move into the next video. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in a little bit.